Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on leveraging customer case studies to power your content strategy. Really excited to have Jehan joining us. I've worked with Jehan before, and I'm just a huge fan. Super, super smart. He is a seasoned product marketing leader, worked at startups like 15Five, LinkedIn, Udacity, and has seen firsthand the power of customer stories and the importance of finding a really good narrative with your customers to power everything from marketing collateral, website, sales enablement, and sales collateral. So Jehan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. Really excited to cover this fun topic with you.
Yeah, absolutely. First to just kind of start out, we're talking a lot about how to prepare for 2024, and a lot of things have changed this year. A lot of tactics that used to work maybe don't work quite as well for us marketers, but it feels like the thing that's always consistent is the need for a really good case study. And so I'm curious, from your seat and working in all the different companies you have, what do you think makes case studies such an important component of your content strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a good observation. I think you're absolutely right. There's a ton of interest for case studies by sales teams still today, and of course, more importantly, by customers themselves as they're evaluating different solutions. And what I personally just love about case studies or customer stories as a content type is that it can impact everything from top of the funnel all the way through to bottom of the funnel. And so if your content team is focused on building trust right at the top of the funnel, trust and credibility, and at the same time impacting sales at the bottom of the funnel, then customer stories or case studies are a fantastic way to have that cross-sectional impact, right? So you can, just to bring it more to life, and I know that we'll be getting into more details later, but you can use the content that you create for customer stories to power a lot of your paid and organic lead gen efforts. And you can also use that same content middle of the funnel as your audience is trying to self-serve and self-educate. And then if you do have, if you are a sales-led business, or if there is a sales motion in order to close business, we'll also talk about probably later on in terms of how case studies and customer stories can have an impact there as well. At the end of the day, once a prospect decides that they're going to start evaluating your solution as a potential solution, and they want to basically include it in their consideration set, the first question that they're going to ask is, can I trust them, right? And where are they going to look to see if they can actually trust you? They're going to look for some proof points, for some signals of evidence, by probably going around on your site and looking for either testimonials or customer stories to get that signal, right? They'll be looking also externally, but you can very easily differentiate yourself by having a good volume of customer stories, and also customer stories that are created in a way where it actually kind of meets your prospects' needs in terms of what they're looking for, so that when they're reading them, they're like, aha, yes, this gives me a good feeling. Like, I have high confidence that if I continue exploring this company or this vendor, if I continue engaging with their brand, if I continue, consuming more of their content, it's going to be time well spent, because I've already established that I can trust them, and they've probably done this before, especially for clients like myself. So just to give you a little bit of flavor, I think it's super helpful when a content type can impact the entire funnel, and at the same time, it really resonates with the actual prospects who are evaluating your solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to the saying that we love to throw around, but it's the IBM effect. No one ever got fired for implementing IBM. And I feel like, especially at a startup or a company that maybe doesn't have the brand recognition of a Salesforce or an IBM or a Microsoft, customer stories and customer testimonials are a way to kind of lower the friction and create that confidence that, hey, this is a trusted resource. We are going to solve your problem, and hopefully kind of builds that confidence that it's the right fit for prospect and company.
So true. Yeah, I've never worked at a megacorp like IBM, but I have been at some of the bigger tech companies. And even the bigger tech companies, the publicly traded companies, even their sales teams are usually demanding more customer stories because they know it's going to make an impact for the, for the prospect who's going through the sales cycle. So even for those companies that have that massive brand recognition, like LinkedIn, for example, where I've worked in the past, customer stories play a huge role across the entire funnel. So if that's the case, then chances are, no matter, whether you're seed or Series A, early stage, mid stage, I think they play a really big role.
Absolutely. So then I go to the best question, which is, if we know how important they are and they impact every part of the funnel, why are they always the biggest headache for marketing teams?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It is so true. Pretty much every sales team that I start supporting and start working closely with in a product marketing capacity, their number one ask is, we need more customer stories. And when you start digging into it, you can start to see some of the reasons why. The big thing that I've kind of noticed is that most sales and marketing teams just underestimate the number of stories you need. So just the size of your customer story bank. And then also just how often you need to refresh those stories. The reason why is because, again, when a customer comes in looking at your solution, they're looking for pieces of evidence or clues that suggest that you've helped someone like them. So when it comes to like evaluating whether or not they can find that, they're looking for customer stories that resonate with their use cases, with potentially their industry, with whatever can signal that, yes, we've helped someone like you. So I look at things like use cases, industries, and even like customer type, for example. Now, the other key thing is making sure that you have a fresh bank of customer stories from like year to year, because often what happens is, given the constant change in the marketplace around customer needs, new competitors cropping up, new technology, things are constantly changing, and therefore your customer stories need to keep up with that. Not the least of which is, chances are, from year to year, your own business strategy is also probably changed in terms of how you're going to market, what you're selling, and who you're actually targeting. So for example, if you are now targeting a new industry or going after a new geography potentially, I think customer stories needs to be a part of that rollout plan or of that market launch plan as well. And so when you think about the fact that you need high volume and you need to keep these stories fresh, really, to be honest, customer stories turns into someone's full-time job. It is a ton of work to actually get this done and to kind of accomplish it so that it can have the impact you want it to have across the entire funnel. You need someone who's constantly working with your customer success org or with the sales team to identify good candidates. You need to know how to reach out to these candidates and get them to buy into actually, participating in your customer story program and publicizing their name, title, and company name. Then you need to know like how to ask them really, really good questions and ensure that you can turn that interview, that limited time that you may have with the customer, into an in-depth, compelling story, right? It can't just be a simple advertisement like, here are the results, right? We did this. There's got to be more depth to it, and so you've got to know how to interview these folks so that you can get that kind of depth. And then last but not least, it's about storytelling as well. So taking that interview and turning it into a story that reads well, that delivers value up front, that's also easy to read, and then it can be used kind of across the funnel, right? You can't just copy and paste it. You've got to repurpose it a little bit so that it can be used across the funnel. All of that takes a ton of time, and what ends up happening is usually what happens is that someone gets started on the customer story initiative, and then other priorities start to crop up, and then it just gets forgotten about. And so, for everyone who's listening to this webinar today, if you go and research many of your competitors, 80 or 90% of the time, they're only going to have somewhere between 5 and 10 customer stories. And I guarantee you that's probably not enough. And so this is a great area. So like what makes customer stories so difficult is also where the value comes from, because if you can turn this into a strength of yours, then it can actually differentiate you from your competitors. And so that's the way I look at it, and how I kind of anytime I join a new team, or I'm thinking about working, with a new team, I'm always thinking about, all right, this could be an area that if we can operationalize and turn into a well-oiled machine, it can actually deliver value from a differentiating standpoint as well.
Yeah, there's so much to dive in there. I think the one point though that is often outside of marketing's control is the fact that you have to have customers that are happy and successful and delighted, which often means the other side of marketing is this kind of nice little sandwich between sales and CS, who are always going to be protective of customers and fight it. So there is this kind of dynamic there as well. And I'm curious because I've seen you do this firsthand of agreed, especially when you're launching a new product or a new vertical or a new feature, you want to have that case study or a testimonial to say, look, it's new, but it works. But if your customers have only been using it for a couple months, what if you don't have enough? So would you maybe recommend to marketers to approach thinking a little differently about a customer testimonial or a customer story that maybe doesn't have the full ending as much as we would like, but still can give you some proof points, almost a funnel in itself of customer stories? Of course you want the ending that has the outcome, but like, does a testimonial work well, or saying why they bought you, even if they haven't achieved the outcome of why they bought you quite yet?
Absolutely. Yes. Certainly, like, think pragmatically and creatively, right, about customer stories. Think about what your business needs here and now, and think about what's also available from a customer experience standpoint. You're so right. Sometimes you are in a situation where maybe you don't have that many established customers. You might only have a few. Maybe you have none even, right? Well, if you have zero, then 100% agreed. Like, maybe you should have launched a little bit earlier. Maybe you should have launched with a few beta customers, perhaps, where the customer story was a part of the beta agreement. Or you might just have to wait maybe a couple of months, but it should certainly be part of your plan to get that done. However, if you do have a few early customers, and like you said, they just haven't had the time they just haven't spent enough time with your product to kind of result in some major impact that you can then turn into a customer story. Think about what kind of successes they have had so far. What are they willing to, can they share why they actually chose your product, how they're actually planning on using it, right? Are they even just willing to go public with their opinions? That holds a lot of weight as you think about taking the next step to hopefully attracting that next cohort of customers. And then as time goes on, you can continue to build a stronger bank of stories, and also strengthen the stories that are already in your story bank as well.
For sure. The other piece I was thinking of when you're talking about sales is, I agree, oftentimes there is not enough to really get the segmentation, because we love prospects, but they think they're special snowflakes. And just because you did it for one doesn't mean you can do it for me. So you really want to try to be as segmented as possible to reach, the various ICP or buyer personas that you have. But how many times have we also gotten the ask from sales of like, hey, I really would love a finance testimonial or finance case study. And you're like, cool, here's both our website and our Google Drive, and here are 3 case studies for finance. Please select which one you'd like to use. And so the sales enablement piece, I feel like also gets lost so often of like, hey, we are creating content, or we do have these testimonials, or have you looked at G2 Crowd? What are some best practices around keeping the case studies fresh and top of mind for everyone in the organization so that they actually get used?
Yeah. I think sales enablement or any form of internal comms follows the same rule as external comms. Repetition is your friend. And because sales and CS teams, even, they've got so many things flying by them at such a high speed, and they've got so many sort of different balls in the air. I found that repetition is what really works. So don't assume that because you've mentioned the case study program in your organization when it first launched, and maybe 1 or 2 times since then, that people are paying attention, that people have taken the time to dig into your story inventory, and they've studied it. So, find ways to deliberately repeat your message, even if it's an opportunity to just focus on that message. And then also find ways to pepper in the same message in other comms that you may be also thinking about, especially when it comes to comms targeted to your sales team. So just keep reminding them, and I find that really works. And then if that still doesn't work, then I would maybe think about it. I'd probably start partnering with more sales leaders and maybe a sales enablement professional within your organization to start thinking about further training, right? Sometimes, and to be honest, this is also a great question, because oftentimes I've heard on sales calls, because I listen to a lot of Gong calls as well, just sales recordings. Customers are often asking for examples in real time, right? And so salespeople also just need to be really fluent with examples of how you as a company, as a vendor, have helped other companies, and they need to be able to bring in those anecdotes in a real-time manner, and it needs to be succinct, right? And they need to be able to talk about it as if we've actually done it many times. And if you have those customer stories in your story inventory, and the sales team isn't necessarily surfacing them at the right time and in the right way, then I think it's a great opportunity to do more targeted sales training around it as well.
Yeah, great points all around. So we talked a little bit about why case studies can be a bit of a headache, but I'm curious, what are some best practices around a really good case study?
Yes. So the first thing is being prepared. So you've really got to be prepared before you go into the customer conversation. And one cheat code that I like to use is, obviously everyone knows that you should have a good discussion guide. So you should be well aligned with your team on that, in terms of how do you, what kinds of stories do you want to bring out of these customer case studies and stories, and so you've got to be aligned on what questions you're going to ask. Okay. You don't want to necessarily be super scripted, but you do want to go in well prepared to get the insights that you need. Now, one of the things that I like to do before I actually talk to the customer is have a short session with the CSM or the salesperson who may be closest to the customer already. And so what you can do by doing that is you can get all of the nitty-gritty details out of the way. You should be, after you have that initial conversation with the CSM or the sales team or the account team who's close to the customer, you should have enough context so that when you spend those precious 30 or 45 minutes in the customer interview, you're truly digging into what's really important, and you have enough time to get into the depth. So it's not enough just to ask, hey, what kind of results did we drive for you? What you really need to get into is the how, and what steps were taken, and what was the experience like, because that's what you want to bring out in your customer story. You don't want your customer story to just be a 300 to 500 word piece of content. You want it to be you want it to provide depth. You still want it to be easy to read, but you do want it to be in depth. And so I find that if you have a good process, then you can actually achieve that. And then one thing that, again, we might talk about, which is by doing that, your customer stories will hopefully go beyond just being an advertisement. Like, hey, look how great we are. Because from what I have learned from just doing a lot of win-loss interviews and just digging into what kind of marketing content is helpful, is that prospects don't really want to only see the impact and the results. That's table stakes, but what they really want is they want to learn something from reading your customer stories. And so if they can come out of reading your customer story, feeling good about the results and the impact, but also feel like, hey, I learned something about working with this company. I learned something about how to drive some of these results. I learned something about what I should be thinking about as I evaluate vendors and think about rolling out this product or service within my own organization. Mm-hmm. If they come out with that mindset, now you've really, you're really setting yourself apart and going above and beyond what I think even your competitors are probably doing. And the great thing about this is that it's not easy to do, it's hard to do. So if you do it, I guarantee you that you will not be copied.
Yeah, well, one of the questions on that I've gotten from you that I now ask in every case study customer interview is, what advice do you have for another, insert company name, yes, prospect? Because I've always been shocked that it really kind of speaks to pain points, disorganization, making sure, it all depends on the organization you're in. But what we hear a lot is, make sure you actually have someone who can dedicate time, or you have a strategy, or you have clear guidelines, or, whatever that looks like, that actually is really valuable, regardless of if you're using us as a service or not. It just stands as a really good best practice across the board. And then I agree with you. To me, it's always the question that I find maybe the most interesting answer, or the answer that I, didn't expect to hear.
Yeah. So if you don't do anything else, but at least you ask that question and you document the response and you add it to the end of your case study as things that, we learned, or things that I wish I knew, even that can just have such a big impact. And then by doing that, and by going after that kind of depth, one thing that I forgot to mention is that customer stories can actually then power your content engine, because now you've got more ideas in terms of what kinds of content you can create, right, to follow up. And it's all based on feedback from the most important stakeholder, which is your customer. And so that's another real power up of customer stories is, you're able to continue feeding your content engine with relevant content.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, what are some, you said it earlier, actually, that it's never just a case study. It's never just the narrative. If it is, that's great, but it's table stakes. There's so much more you could be doing. So I'm curious, how else have you seen this be repurposed across the funnel?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and another great point about customer stories is that it's not just a one and done thing. It's the gift that kind of keeps on giving, especially if you take this approach of wanting to actually deliver value, and value that your prospects and customers care about. They want to learn something. And so if you have this in-depth content, right, that is hitting on so many different points, now you've got a really rich treasure trove of content in each customer story itself that you can then repurpose, right? So think about how you can take quotes and maybe even snippets of customer stories and start to create a calendar of social posts, right, to fill up your social calendar. Think about how you can use it to then power some of your paid channels and your paid acquisition efforts. How can they be turned into ads? How can they be turned into potential other ways to reach and engage your audience? I know, for example, that a lot of folks like to use review sites. Review sites like G2 and others have a spot for content. So you can populate your presence around the web also with these customer stories, where people are going to find out about your product and about your service without necessarily going to yourcompany.com. The other thing I'd also say is at the bottom of the funnel. So once you've got this a healthy bank of customer stories, you might think about how you can repurpose them into sales assets. So most customer stories these days are in the form of a long form blog post. can you summarize them into a one-slide version so that when your sales team member is, or when your sales team is pitching to someone in the financial services industry, for example, they've got 5 slides talking about 5, like summarizing 5 clients and how you've helped them achieve success.
Yep.
And then the last thing I'll say is just around those anecdotes, right? You can take the bank of customer stories and you can just take out little snippets and say, hey, sales team, every time you hear this, bring up these like short 2 to 3 line anecdotes so that in conversation, your sales team can come across as fluent in helping prospects that look and feel like the people that they're sitting across from. So those are just some of the ways. I honestly think, the sort of the world is your oyster. There's just so many things that you can do. It just depends on your imagination.
Absolutely. Well, and there's some things too around how to create this cadence, which if we have time, would love to circle back to, but inviting customers to be on a webinar and then record that webinar. And now you have a video asset, you have the transcript, you can turn that into things. If you have a podcast, it's such a great way to kind of, I don't want to say disguise a customer story, but reduce some friction to say, hey, would you like to join a podcast and talk about your experience and your perspective on this topic? And now it's publicly available and you maybe don't call it a case study, but you have it that you can repurpose into social. And then one kind of tip that I love is customer stories are one of the best ways to drive engagement. And I feel like I'm taking a bit of a like 180 turn because we're here talking about marketing, but internal employee engagement is so important. And keeping customer stories top of mind are a great way to show the meaning to your employees of what you're doing. And it's also a lot of times customers love being invited to quarterly or biannual all hands meetings and doing a fireside chat. And oftentimes if you record it or do it, a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. And now you have an interview that you can grab and do all these things that Jehan said too. So getting creative with how you make the ask and then getting it written and audio and visual gives you, just like you said, the world is your oyster. So
people want to help the community, and everyone belongs to some or the other community, and they want to help. And so when you position customer stories as an opportunity to actually help others learn from them, you're absolutely right. They're usually more than willing. And if you, like you said, if it happens to be an internal chat that you didn't think you were going to publicize, you can always reach back out to those customers and say, hey, I thought this was great. Everybody loved it. Are you open to this? And there are ways of making that ask and ensuring that everything feels good from their company's perspective. But it's certainly like, don't waste that opportunity, right?
Right. For sure. I know we're coming up on time, but we did have a great question that I think follows on to this conversation, which is cold emails. And there's a lot of cold emails that happen nowadays. And so how have you seen folks leverage customer stories or testimonials really effectively through that channel?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about cold emails is don't make your prospect click to get the value from the customer story that you're using to communicate. So don't make it a PDF download, don't make it a link, don't make it anything else, right? Put the value of your customer story, whatever it is that you're trying to communicate, that value prop, into the body of the email. So the more that you can show your cold email recipient or your prospect that you understand them, and the more that you can deliver that value without them having to take very much effort, I think the more likely you are to get a response back. And there's so many ways of using customer stories to do that within cold email. Maybe that's like a follow-up session. But I love that idea. And I think as long as you can do it in a value-driven way, I think you'll get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, I love that. I wrote that down myself as just a good reminder. And I think to your point, kind of bringing us back of making sure you have a good volume and a variety of customer stories. Because again, you want to show you understand them. So if you're sending a lawyer something about a CPA, they're not going to resonate with it. And so the more direct you can match your customer stories with the ICP, in your cold emails also to probably a better response rate.
I think even in cold emails, people want to see the story. They want to learn something from it. And if they feel they like they learned something that they can take back and use, I think you are going to drive that engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are at time. Sarah just dropped it in the chat. I completely agree. We could easily do probably a whole 90-minute workshop on customer stories and how to get all of it. But thank you everyone so much for joining. Jehan, thank you for sharing the practical, tactical knowledge that we're taking from this. And we definitely might have to do a part 2 here at some point.
I'd love to. Thank you for having me.
Of course. We are recording this, so keep an eye out on your inbox. We'll send that to everyone, hopefully by tomorrow. I'm going to drop Jehan's LinkedIn one more time in the chat. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn. He has great content. And next week is our final webinar of the series. So I'm also in the chat. I'm dropping the link to register. If you aren't registered, we'd love to see you as we close it out. But thank you again, and we will see you next week.
It was a pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Bye.